This is the Henry's Child Podcast. Am I crazy? Or am I just raving?
Just heard was Tuvan Throat Singing from my new friend, Soriah. A couple weeks ago, I was working away in my office, and I heard a low rumbling, a very tribal, sort of primitive sound coming from a couple offices down. And it turned out it was my friend, Jonathan Howitt's office. He's a percussionist, and he had been playing with a Tuvan Throat Singer. And so for the first time when I was working, I was able to hear Tuvan Throat Singing literally feet away from where I was working. And it really was an amazing thing to go in and see this guy making this giant noise from just his throat, just from singing. It was incredible. As it turns out, it was an artist named Soriah. He came over to my office and we started chatting. And as it turns out, he's played with Wynia, a floater. He's even cut a record with Mazinga Studios and Daniel Riddle producing it from episode 32 of this Am I Crazy or Am I Raving podcast. And so I decided to bring him on the show and have a great conversation with him. And we did. We talked about all kinds of stuff, about how spiritual music can be and how we're really more the same than we are different. So please enjoy my conversation with Soriah. Well, thanks for coming down.
Absolutely.
Talking about some music and...
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Your stage persona is Soriah.
Correct.
Your name, or you were introduced to me as Enrique.
Correct, yes.
Which of those would you like to be referred to?
Well, generally, if we're just on a personal basis, then Enrique's fine. But as far as in context with my music, especially having to do with Soriah, then Soriah. Soriah is kind of like a suit, a spirit suit that I put on, as it were. You know.
Beautiful, yeah.
Yeah.
So does Soriah come on when you rehearse as well?
I would say if it's successful, yeah.
Okay, good.
If it's successful, Soriah for me is kind of like the state of trance or gnosis, so that I get to utilizing my vocal techniques or just my presence being kind of like pulled forth into the moment kind of thing.
Right, even before you said that, I thought about sort of my persona just as a performer, and I recently started doing a little bit longer meditations, right? And so I feel like if there's like a 3.5 to 4 minutes and I know it's not going to happen, I just sort of stop the timer and I'm like, okay, whatever. But feeling that as really being taken by that, because that's really a lot of performing is being taken by something else. And at least my perception for my performing is I'm just a conduit for whatever's occurring in the moment. Yeah. Because one of the things Daniel Riddle talked about was how each sort of time that there's a live performance, it's a unique blending of the sort of the energy of the crowd and the energy of the performer sort of coming out. So
energetic loop, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a circuit.
Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm. So where did the name Soriah come from?
It came out of nowhere. Back in the 90s, I was in the studio recording this song that I had composed. I've always had trouble coming up with names for things, titles for stuff. And so I asked the engineer, I said, what should I call this song? He's like, well, what's it about? And the lyrics were about my timeless essence, speaking to my Enrique, my earthly essence here, about what in life is worth fretting over. And basically,
oh, wow, yeah. Uh-huh.
basically what the timeless essence was telling me was just like, there was really not a lot to be concerned over. If you ever get into any trouble, just close your eyes, listen to my voice, and I'll guide you.
Wow.
Guide you through life, and just to be a constant reminder of all in all. And my friend, he was the engineer. He was like, "So who is that? What's his name? Or what's its name?" And so I just kind of went into this kind of lucid but yet blank state of mind, and I just spoke Soriah. I had no idea of any kind of cultural context or anything at all. It just kind of came out, and it felt right. And
So you just breathed that out into the world, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I had kept that in my pocket for a couple of years. I thought to myself, I'll use this at some point, but its fullness hasn't been revealed to me yet. Its placement hasn't been revealed. So anyway, around that time, I started with my Boss DDR pedal. I would just start doing loops, just creating loops, and on my little cheap 4-track tape recorder, I would just loop and loop and loop, and I started doing vocal experiments, doing some weird stuff, just even like, I wouldn't say beatboxing, but creating rhythms with my voice and just kind of looping that and kind of creating these whole kind of orchestral things just with these loops. I started like getting an essence about like what the spirit of what that was to be a couple of years later. And then on my birthday, I guess it was maybe 98 or so, I had an intense Gnostic space, and on my birthday with some friends, and we were doing rounds of DMT in a crypt that we had broken into in a cemetery not too far from here. That was a really awakening experience of where I was completely thrown into my pure kind of awakened essence. And so a big quality of that energy was my throat singing that I had just started learning. And so that was kind of like, this is where that applies. So I applied it to that energy, that essence. And so, yeah, it felt right.
So you had Soriah, you had breathed Soriah into the world before you became a Tuvan Throat Singer.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think it exists beyond that. Tuvan Throat Singing is a really great vehicle. It's not it entirely. I wouldn't say that Soriah is throat singing. It's what's behind the throat singing. It's like what the information that's coming through, that's being transmitted through me. Like you were saying, that you were just a channel. The throat singing is me, is kind of Enrique. That's the craft that I've learned here, but it's being kind of spoken through the lens of my life experience.
Sure, sure.
So, yeah. But yes, yeah. To answer your question, yes, that I had kind of an idea, a feeling of what that was, but I just didn't have a way at the time to really express it properly. It wasn't until, my delvings in gnosis in that way, that was able to really be realized in here on this plane anyway.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that's really true of a lot of things. We don't really know what's happening in the moment until we sort of have the hindsight, or we go through it, or more importantly, I feel like, and this is where music has made the most impact for me, is when it sort of becomes experiential. I noticed when I was reading your Wikipedia page, which totally kicks ass, by the way.
Awesome.
Do you manage your Wikipedia page?
Thankfully not. I wouldn't be as good at it
it's
as
really good, man.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I'll tell the parties that have helped me along the way. They know who they are.
It was really good. But one of the things I noticed is that you are a Bay Area boy.
Yeah. Well, yeah. From '77, I wasn't born there, but I spent a lot of my. I moved there in '77 after living in England for 3 years, and then before that in San Bernardino for 3 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I moved there when I was 7 years old.
So you grew up and had a lot of influence there. When did you move to Portland?
I moved to Portland in '96. I've been here for 22 years, yeah.
And your dad was involved in music too, right?
He was very much so. He was a very successful drummer in a band in Mexico City during the British invasion of Mexico, in a band called Los Sputniks. And yeah, they were very popular. You can check out YouTube videos of Los Sputniks, and they were regulars on what would be the equivalent of the Ed Sullivan Show in Mexico. It's kind of like
Oh, for reals, huh?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, like the variety TV show on Sunday nights with the Sykes and the Go-Go Dancers, and
Sure.
yeah. It was, you could feel the energy in some of those tapings of like this whole wave of youth explosion that was happening in Mexico during that time. And there was a very cool genre of Mexican style rock and roll, like early rock and roll that was going on. That
Are we talking like late 50s or
late 50s,
early 60s?
early 60s.
Okay.
Late 50s into the mid 60s, and that's when my dad got out of it. But yeah, certainly it kind of kept going. And yeah, it's a.
How old was he when you were born?
He was 26.
So he had probably just left that scene then, huh?
Not too long after. He had actually come to the United States to become. He joined the Air Force, and he became a pilot and mechanic. He was already been doing mechanical stuff in Mexico, working on VWs, and he got his certification as a VW mechanic. And yeah,
Got to have good vision
came
for the
in-
Air Force.
yeah. I mean, vision in both senses. He was always really interested. I just found this out recently, that even since he was a young kid, he was interested in like aerodynamics and just flight and rockets and stuff like that. And he would get teased for his amount of knowledge for that kind of stuff, rockets and things.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But he followed his passion, and he did it. He did it well. He succeeded, I would say. Yeah. He ended up being a flight engineer in the Air Force.
Oh, cool.
Flying for these giant cargo planes, the C-141s and whatnot. So I was always around these big planes. When I was a kid, there was always the sounds of, and it's funny. I didn't realize it until years later, but that the sounds of these big, huge cargo planes like the 141s and the C-5s, and you can hear them flying ahead. I mean, these massive engines, these
Suckers are
these
big, huh?
like the size of buses, these engines, and the sounds that they make actually sound a whole lot like Tuvan Throat Singing. It's
Oh, really?
interesting.
That sort of
Yeah.
resonant, kind of
Yeah.
very deep. Yeah, okay.
It's these drones, the engine drones that would fly around, and how they would interact with like the Doppler effect and like all these things and whatnot. It's been interesting to kind of go back there and say, oh, actually, that's kind of the sound of my childhood in a way.
Wow, and that's great for you to make that connection too.
Yeah, once you start learning about harmonics and producing them, and you start hearing them everywhere, opens your ears and your mind to all these frequencies that are happening all around us that we just kind of we take either take for granted or just don't hear at all. We just compartmentalize them peripherally in our consciousness.
Sure. And I think that by nature, we are designed, especially now, technology is so ahead of our evolution that we're still trying to figure out how to get there.
Right.
And so now we're dealing with exactly what you're saying, which is like a new currency is focus, right? Focus has become a currency. So I think a lot of this stuff sort of happens as it's around, and we hear it, but
Right.
we don't really pay attention, nor do we really kind of the next level is we kind of give it meaning that becomes meaning to us.
Right.
So it's sort of what becomes important, because I'll tell you what, ever since I was in my office and I heard you playing next door, I was all, wow, like that's really cool. And it just sort of put me on this sort of path. We were kind of chatting and stuff before. It just sort of put me on this path to kind of explore it a little more. So you kind of grew up in the Bay Area. You moved up here in 96.
Yeah.
So you had been recording and doing some loops and stuff before.
Yeah.
And then in 98, you had this experience. Is that kind of when you got into
Well,
Tuvan
a
Throat
friend
Singing?
of mine, Dorian, who I was playing music with at the time in our band Sumerland, he made me a mixed CD of just a bunch of different music, And on one of the tracks on that CD was this group called Hunhurtu, which is the preeminent Tuvan Throat Singing band that tours around. And they come to Portland quite often. They have been ever since the mid-'90s when the communist system fell and all these microcultures in Central Asia were actually able to flourish. And so that was really, the fall of communism was actually the reason why the world has been kind of given insight into these cultures that had been squelched that whole time. That's really what started it. So, so he made me a mixtape. And then shortly after, they came to the Aladdin and muscled my way up to the front row, and I bootlegged the performance with this obnoxiously noisy tape recorder. I was in the front row, this tape recorder in my breast pocket, and just so I'd have to pause it, make sure to pause it in between the songs, so that the people on either side of me weren't
affected by it. Sure,
affected by it. But yeah, it wasn't to sell copies and whatnot, which is something that they're very sensitive about. In fact, they're still kind of mad even when I told them that I recorded their.
Oh, you told them years later?
Yeah. We're all chummy now, but I get to see that that's just the automatic response. Oh, you recorded that? Oh no, like, how could you? But I was
funny
just...
because I pay people a lot of money to record Henry's Child
shows
or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it was just for my personal thing, and I took it home and I studied it, and I got the gist of it. I'll say that I was by no means any kind of expert.
Right, but you found it and you kind of liked it, and you're
and I was able to get some of the sounds that they were making. Yeah, just astonished by it, and so I just practiced, and I would get it, and then I would lose it, and then would find it again, and then I would lose it again.
Mm-hmm.
And, Now it's just like breathing for me now.
That's great. So did you go over there to compete?
The first time I went there in 2007 was actually the third year in a row that I had studied with Tuvans. The first two times were actually here in the States. I studied with this group called Chigulchin, whose members now include the Minister of Culture of Tuva and the director of the Tuvan Cultural Center in Kazil. Two of the others just amazing artists of note in the Philharmonic Orchestra and ensembles. And I studied with them in California, first time in Sebastopol in 2005, and then at the Harbin Hot Springs down in California in 2006. And so they invited me to go for the first throat singing workshop in Tuva in 2007.
Oh, wow.
So that was my first time there. I had a really incredible, amazing time there, and I met a lot of people who would change the trajectory of my being there. And then in 2008, that happened to fall in the year that they do the quinquennial every 5 years of the International Throat Singing Symposium, put on by this amazing woman, very dedicated to the art of throat singing. Her name is Zoya Kyrgyz. She runs the throat singing kind of society there.
Okay.
And she has an office there, and so she puts on these festivals every 5 years. And that's when they go around and they search out for throat singers from all over the world, and then they invite them to come and participate in a competition, a festival and competition of throat singing. So everybody from China, from Mongolia, from Finland, from Austin, Portland, and all over the world they come and compete. And that was 2008, and I won third place overall, which was outside any non-Tuvan has ever placed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Such an honor.
You've seen Genghis Blues? Have you seen that movie? It's a really fantastic movie about Tuvan throat singing. It's about this wonderful blind blues musician. His name was Paul Pina. He wrote Jet Airliner, that was covered by the Steve Miller Band.
Oh, yeah. I know.
Amazing, super heartful blues man. He fell in love with Tuvan throat singing, and they were able to get him over to do this to participate in this very competition.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
and
that's
he
cool.
he won first place for the Kagura division.
And what
which
is that?
The Kagura is the deep throat singing style. He had a particularly loud, bombastic, and they called him the earthquake. That was his style, earthquake.
The earthquake.
Throat singing, yeah, really a beautiful. Everybody has their own instrument, and they bring to throat singing, and his was particularly astounding. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
But I was the first one to ever place as far as the overall competition. Like, so they have different categories for different styles or techniques of throat singing. So he won for that. He won first place for that technique. But I was able to win third place overall with all these techniques. I had held that since then until this year, where young Humeji, American, his name is Robert McLaughlin. He's fantastic. He also got third place overall, which is astounding. Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to make that distinction because I know there's going to be maybe a number of people who are like, oh, well, in the movie he won the whole thing, and he won a horse. Well, but he actually didn't. He won. He won the Kagura competition, and they had him on a horse later on.
Oh, okay.
Kind of, yeah. But it's a beautiful movie, and this guy, you just feel for him so much because he's got such love for music. Anytime anybody goes to Tuva, it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing.
Yeah, tell me about that. What is it? What is it like there?
Well, what most people would say would be a third world country, but tell that to a Tuvan. That's their life. And you would say it's the most remote place on the earth, but that's just from our perspective.
Sure.
But for them, of course, it's their center of their universe, and it's such a beautiful place. It's just full of nature. Not many roads, not many paved roads.
Okay.
No fences. There's one urban center, and there's the capital of Kazil, which translates to red in the Tuvan language.
Okay.
And it's situated at the merging of three great rivers: the Bichem, the B River, the Kachem, Ka River, and the Uluchem, the Big River, or you could also what people call that the Yenisei as well. It starts in Mongolia, and then it comes into Tuva, and it winds around, and it goes due west, and then it reaches and arcs up north, and it goes all the way up into the Arctic Ocean.
Oh, wow.
It's a pretty amazing river. Yeah, so they've utilized the river, and that spot is a very, very intense spot, and they've utilized it in their culture. There's a great story about rivers and the spirit of Hume. Hume is a spirit, this kind of like this disembodied spirit that comes and drinks from certain rivers, and the rivers of where the spirit drinks, the people who live, the populace who live, who use that same river, end up becoming great throat singers.
Did you drink some from that river?
I wouldn't drink anything from the Uluchem, but I certainly have bathed in it and swam in it. Yeah, for sure.
There's a piece of you.
But
washing over. Sure.
Other rivers I would. But yeah, the rivers are very, very important. Tuva is just such an amazing, wonderful place. It's a horse culture. There's the geography is mostly, it's kind of like the easternmost portion of the Great Steppe that spans all the way to Turkey. On the north, it's bordered by the Sion mountain range, and to the south is Mongolia. There's a lot of mountains, and to the west there's this beautiful region called Mongun Taiga, which translates to the silver forest, but it's more of like a lunar landscape. It's just
really,
yeah, it's where the Siberian spotted leopards are, and
okay,
just amazing. But it's just a beautiful landscape. It's like it's not difficult to just find yourself in a spot that has not been changed. It has not been changed since the trajectory of the river.
I would have a hard time kind of getting in, like when that realization is over you. That's why
That's just what you've been accustomed to.
Right,
so,
totally.
yeah.
I mean, if you see this all your life and that's your landscape, we're I mean, we could even go down the road of like, oh, well, Portland's being overbuilt and all that, it's just like, it's just, sure, there's landmarks that have moved in that have become a part of it. But I'm with you. There's something very spiritual about that. There's something really truly beautiful about the land that is not touched, unpolluted. And again, I'm not saying like Portland necessarily is polluted, but I'm saying that it's probably a very spiritual experience to feel that.
There's something ancient that awakens you when you have that realization, and you're just you're taking it in.
Yeah.
You're breathing in this realization, like this has been here and it hasn't been touched. Well, relatively. I mean, there's the tracks in the grass that you made with your car that you came up the road with.
Nice job.
Yeah. But yeah, for the most part, yeah. And it's a precious thing to behold, really. And it's so inspiring, and that's the essence of Tuvan Throat Singing. That's the moral of the story is to absorb yourself in these places, in these moments, and to sing that, to sing the landscape, the environment, the essence, the moment, kind of like what are you feeling, and that's you sing it back to it.
I think we would all get along a lot better if we did that.
Yeah.
And we're being very present without sort of the baggage of the past, or even taking the past and putting it into the future,
right?
Which a lot of people do. I want to move maybe and talk briefly about the spiritual element of this. And one thing that I wasn't able to really figure out on my own, but I believe that there exists a harmonic resonance. There's a certain vibration that happens in throat singing that is, it's hard to describe. It really hits me at a core. Like I instantly, I was going to say it resonates with me, and I don't mean that in a cliche way. I feel like
in a frequency. You're talking about frequency.
I am, yeah. In a frequency way that was comforting and almost relaxing in a sense. What is your experience with those vibrational harmonics? And I mean, does that play a part of kind of who you are when you're performing this?
It's interesting that you prefaced it as a spiritual thing. I think what people call spiritual and kind of harmonic vibration kind of can be interchanged. Or basically, it's just something that affects you that is unseen.
Sure, there you go. That's a great definition.
Because I feel that's what people are meaning to say. As far as the spirit essence, I mean, we can go off we can go off about that. But for me, it's every time I sing it, it's kind of like it's a laboratory experiment. How does this affect people? How does it affect me? How, if I sing this way, what is the effect on people's kind of consciousness, and what does it affect on my consciousness? How do I transmit that? Making and exploring, and I'm still exploring. I certainly haven't come to the end of my exploring different areas or regions. When there's a narrative that happens, and you're in a space, and then you see it as a space. It's kind of an ambient space that's created with a moving energy, a moving frequency, and in a very kind of hypnotic way. And then you tweak it a little bit, and then you're in a different realm.
Sure.
And then you move from realm to realm to realm, and hopefully, my what I try to do is kind of create a narrative of these different places, in a sense, of where the brain resides, and it's reacting to this frequencies and whatnot. And it is relaxing. It can be relaxing. It could be invigorating, awe-inspiring. Like, wow, okay, this is, or it could be very like a psychedelic trip. When your senses are being kind of manipulated, or you're manipulating your senses, you start to hear things differently, and it could be as just simple as like putting your fingers all over your ears and going back and forth, that kind of thing, and you have like a static thing, and you can play with that and whatnot. This is all very natural, these natural sounds that actually exist in our everyday consciousness that we don't see. But I know what you're saying about how do we express that? What is it about that affects us? The unseen element of frequency that hits us. I mean, it is in many ways, matter.
Mm-hmm.
Frequency
Sure.
is matter, and it does, kind of hit us in a way. That's. I wish I had a more concrete explanation for it, but at the same time, I'm really loving the agnostic part of it, of where I don't know exactly. This is all being kind of laid before my brain right before I kind of create these places.
Sure.
You know.
Okay. No, I get that. And part of it is too being human. And in 2018, like my brain just looks for definitions of things, and it gets confused when I think about forever, or when I think about things that have no end. And because regardless of whether you and I are sitting here in Portland, or if we're in the Matrix, or wherever we're doing, that all of that energy still exists. It's all kind of around us and flowing through us, and it's a part of us. So to capture that, I mean, I just kind of got that too. I mean, I can listen to a King Black Acid album and feel a sense of spirituality too, in that it sort of reminds me a little bit of Pink Floyd and when I was a kid. Like there's elements of that. In fact, the other day, my son and I were creating a pizza. We had spent all this time finding the right kind of pepperoni that we had previously had. My wife is a vegetarian, so I don't. So when it's just me and the boy, we eat meat, right? So it's kind of this very like kind of special thing that we have or whatever. And so we spent a long time getting back to that. And he said, "Well, why? Like what do you care if this pepperoni tastes like or whatever?" I'm like, because what we had reminded me of being 6 years old with my dad going to this other place, and so. And I'm not a person who typically is like kind of in touch with all of his senses and things like that. I'm a little more of I label myself as an INTJ, and I do lots of computer work. So I'm very logical, and my whole day is very black and white. It's not very spiritual. So when those things capture me, I really fall down into them and really sort of take them in and have them become a part of me. And so that
I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's when you hear these, like say when I was in the next room, there was something that triggered you, of where there was a no mind space. It was just an experiential kind of like medium space where there wasn't of where you were just kind of absorbing. Maybe I think a lot of these frequencies really tap into an ancient part of ourselves, because I mean. It's interesting because we all have the physiology to be able to produce these sounds, and we all have the ability to hear them as well. It takes the two to be able to produce it, but also to be able to experience it, to hear it.
Right.
Sure. And to hear it that way, and kind of like the mind unlocking in order to kind of be at this kind of like neutral, kind of like floaty space of where you're just being. That always seems to have a very profound effect on people who are listening, and that's I think why I'm still doing it and why people seem to be people are interested in it, and what I do is because it awakens a very personal experience for them that they have with their own bodies, their own human experience. You hear these things and you're like, well, what is that? And a lot of people, they haven't heard it like consciously since they were children. When we're young, all these things are new, and we don't have the way to define them. When they define, they kind of lose their magic in a sense.
Very much so. Very much so. That childlike innocence that you're talking about,
right?
I think even when I grab a glimpse of that, just tail as I turn my head, kind of a thing, it still is very precious and sacred to me on that level.
The mystery of it is kind of the wonder aspect of that. I think a lot of people lose when they get older. People just want to move on, and
right.
Okay, well, I've got that down. On to the next thing. Oh, that's defined. I know what that is. I can use it. I can conjure it. I can use it for whatever I need and whatnot. And I've got this. I've got a handle on this. Let's move on. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's kind of what I like about kind of arresting people and just singing one note, and then opening up a whole world of notes that are residing in one note. Like there's a whole expansive inner space, and all you need to do is just stop. All you need to do is just focus on one thing, and all the other stuff kind of really is, when you're present in that moment. And that's I feel pretty fortunate that this has been my path, because it's helped me through a lot of crazy stuff in my personal life, and I've been able to just arrest my mind from overthinking, from getting too bogged down in things that ultimately aren't that important.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the whole Soriah story of it. It was just like, okay, we'll just stop and listen to the voice, sing it, but listen simultaneously. Be passive, be transparent, become transparent in a way.
Yeah.
Of where you're experiencing and you're producing simultaneously. You're not enforcing anything. You're not enforcing your own stuff.
Your own agenda.
Your own agenda.
Your own thoughts.
So many. Yeah.
Sure.
Right.
No, that's a beautiful place.
Man. Yeah. And so that kind of goes back into this, to the kind of the story about that song that I never told you what the song was. It ended up being called The Course of Soriah. That very first.
Oh, really? Okay.
It was called The Course of Soriah.
Wow.
And so that I hope to kind of extend and maybe inspire people to do it their own way. It's a mystery, but it's not an intangible thing. Anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. Even if you feel that you're tone deaf or whatnot. It has not to do much about musicality. That's the interesting thing about it.
Yeah, I can see that.
I mean, the Tuvan Throat Singers are definitely musical, for sure.
Oh, yeah. No,
They're
totally.
masters at music, even though that to be a great throat singer, or to be, and some of the greatest throat singers have never been able to read music. That wasn't, throat singing is an oral thing. It's not a written language kind of thing, which has been its savior simultaneously. It's what is keeping it from moving on at the same time. Well, I mean, people use it and they're doing fusions like me and kind of keeping it alive in their own way. But so like it's hard for it to be like a recognized discipline. A lot of people will say, well, this really isn't an actual form of music because you can't write it down.
Oh, interesting.
You can't. There's no
You've heard
tablature
that?
to
You've
this
heard that
and
before?
whatnot. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it gets kind of passed by a lot of it and disregarded a lot because it's like, okay, well, all these other types of music you can make tablature for it, and then there you go.
So I heard that you did a record with Daniel Riddle at Mazinga Studios.
I did. It was fantastic. We had a great time.
Yeah.
Yeah. That album was called Derginer Rızı, which translates to Songs of the Masters. I basically wanted to record an album that I could be proud to give it to my teachers and say, here's look what this is what you taught me, and here it is.
Wow.
So I tried to be as meticulous with the language, the phonetics, and the instrumentation as I could. I wanted it to be a Tuvan album. And so, it was great. It was such a joy to work with Daniel. That was a blast.
He's really great, isn't he?
He's really great. He's so open, and he works fast, which is great. Find myself really impatient, especially in the process of engineering and stuff like that, because I do a little bit of that myself. I'm just like, okay, but no, he was right. He was right on it. And
Nice.
of course, I mean, there's so much more to it than I am aware of, and that's why I need other people to help do that for me. But once I'm there, I can get my my hands dirty with it as well. And so, yeah, that was, I mean, just on a very practical level, but on an aesthetic level, he knew what I was going for, even though he wasn't all that aware of like traditional Tuvan music, but he got the sense and he picked it up and he just like ran with it. And I think what came out was really, really beautiful. There's a lot of people said that was some of my best work.
Nice.
So yeah, it was a really pretty album. I did all the instrumentation. It was just layers of stuff. I basically was able to be my own ensemble.
Oh, that's really
nice.
great. Yeah.
And so it was really wonderful working with him. And his studio is so much fun to just hang out and chill in. It's just like
It's pretty cool.
It's like a magical land there of just all these possibilities that are there. It's like, ooh, what does that do? It's just interesting to be down there. It's a fun time sharing with him. It was fun.
He was the first podcast I did back in early September where I took this whole thing and I just went to his studio.
Mm-hmm.
So it was great for me to sort of be absorbed into it and,
Right.
Sort of be in that creative realm and see all those different things that he creates with. Because I got a copy of the Crystal Unicorn, or I should say King Black Acid and the Crystal Unicorn, and I just loved that album. It's so sugary, poppy, just kind of, it's easy to swallow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
I was also told to ask you about Bauhaus.
Yeah. Well,
tell me about Bauhaus.
I grew up as a goth, and I still kind of consider myself a goth. I guess technically now I'm an elder goth.
An elder goth. I like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because people still dance to it. There's still clubs that actually play that music. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. They were a massive influence on me. I mean, just their artistic vision was really brilliant, and it went beyond the aesthetic. And those guys really hate that term goth.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
Yeah, everybody
oh, my
struggles.
Goodness.
Everybody struggles with it except for me, it seems. Even though, I'm the only one.
You're the elder goth.
Even God, so don't label me that. I'm like, I don't care. But I mean, that's by no means am I restricted to the constructs of what that is. I mean,
of course,
what does that even mean? So a few years ago, a friend of mine, Jill Tracy, put me in contact with David J. He came to see a show of mine in Hollywood. And I met him out in the lobby of the Steve Allen Theater. We just hugged. We just hugged. Not a word. It was just like, boom. And I had my white chalk face makeup. Then it just got all over his jacket. And he was like, I don't care. It was great. It was wonderful. And we just kind of kept running into each other. Whenever I would go down there, I'd perform at Bar Sinister, and he happened to be, what was this one time, he was filming a pilot show for a show unfortunately named Goth Only Knows. It was basically a TV magazine or a web magazine, basically an expose of kind of gothic aesthetic artists, visual artists, musicians, anything that has that kind of darker essence into it. So we just kept running into each other, and I was like, hey, if you ever come to Portland, I'm your man. So he for a short time he was considering moving here, and so he'd be my house guest a lot of the time. And so over the years we've developed a nice friendship, and I've performed with him a number of times. He would do a lot of these wonderful, really intimate shows in people's living rooms. It was just like a living room tour, where he would just find somebody who had a neat living room, and it'd be a capper of 50 people, and you'd do a nice, very intimate concert, And so he would bring me up on stage. We'd do collaborations and stuff like that. And once I was with him as basically his backup musician. Yeah, and I'll be performing with him in San Francisco. Recently, he and Peter Murphy have reconciled their differences and are on tour. Currently in Germany right now. In March, there'll be a whole residency of Peter Murphy doing shows in San Francisco at the chapel in the mission, and I was invited to perform twice on two of those shows of his residency. One of them being with David J. doing old Bauhaus songs, and so
congratulations. That's you're really blessed for that. That's awesome, dude.
Come true.
Come
true. Like,
was David J. in Love and Rockets as well?
He was in Love and Rockets as well. Yeah.
That first record, I just really love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mother's
Awesome.
Milk. Yeah.
So you got that show coming up in March. Do you have anything coming up in anytime sooner?
Yes, I'll be performing on January 25th at the Star Theater, opening for Alex Hack of Einstürzen und Neubauten. I'm excited about that. I'm pretty nimble, so people ask me to perform here and there a lot, and so I rarely have shows booked like too far in advance, but I just submitted an application for South by Southwest for the first time.
Oh, cool.
So we'll see how that goes. That would be interesting to do there. I'm really excited about this new album, though. I've got this new fuel about the album. That's, I don't know exactly when it'll be coming out. I've just made it a lot more complex of a project, but I've decided to utilize a lot of the people who I've collaborated with all over the last decade. I performed and recorded with Thor Harris. He played percussion for Swans. Mm-hmm. I recorded for his group, Thor and Friends, and have done a number of shows together. And so I've recruited him to record on this new album. It's going to be entitled Gnostic. And so that really kind of got me the energy flowing. And so David J. will also be a part of this.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, so it's basically going to be each song is going to be like a duet with somebody who I've recorded in the past. And so
that's awesome.
I've done a number of collaborations, like recording collaborations. I've recorded with the Dandy Warhols and Modest Mouse, and see if I can. That would be interesting to get them on it. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm hoping to do. I did a collaboration with Lustmord, and I'm really excited about maybe trying to get him on board for this next album, Gnostic. So I've got a lot of fuel coming within the next couple of months to
awesome.
try to get something going on.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So if somebody wanted to check out your music, where would be the best place to check that out?
Project.com has a lot of stuff. Projekt. That was the recent label that I was on. I released 2 albums with them, but he's got he's got a number of my releases on there, even this prior stuff that was off of Beta Lactam Ring Records, which I don't think exists anymore. But I did 2 albums with Beta Lactam Ring, and I think you can get it through project.com. Actually, I've just been released from my Project record contract, and so I'm actually going to be putting up some of my Project releases on Bandcamp. And so you'll be able to go to, and I have a lot of stuff on Bandcamp that you can get now.
I listened to a lot of your collaborations. Mm-hmm. There was a number of collaborations that were up on Bandcamp, and they're really great.
Yeah, it's pretty eclectic. Anywhere from hardcore analog synth noise to just really pretty, spacious ambient stuff. And it's been an interesting ride. It's been fun just kind of interacting with these people and kind of having it being shown through the Soriah filter.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, thanks so much, man, for coming in and talking some music. And
absolutely.
Had a lot of fun today.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
It came out my mouth.